It's a paradise that belongs on the cover of a travel brochure, tucked away out in the Mediterranean with no one around to bother it. It's a quiet little island called Malta, but beneath the facade, it holds dark secrets and has become one of Europe's biggest troublemakers. Billions of euros flow through Malta every single day on servers that run hundreds of illicit gambling sites, each site stamped with a shiny Maltese gambling license. But more people live in Wyoming than in Malta, so where's all this money coming from? Thanks to a legal loophole, that Maltese license allows gambling companies to set up shop in all the other European countries, even ones where gambling is banned. A loophole Malta has been exploiting for the last 20 years, bringing immense wealth to the island. But it also brought shady businessmen, countless assassinations, and the Italian mafia. For as long as it's existed, Malta had a terribly boring economy built on shipping and tourism. But in 2004, that changed when Malta joined the European Union, giving it access to a new, untapped industry. Online gambling was exploding across Europe. Millions of people were logging into poker rooms, slot sites, and sports books, trying to get rich quick. And online casino owners were raking in cash. European politicians had no idea on what to do. Nobody wanted to risk their reputation by being the first to legalize a new vice industry. And nobody wanted to ban it because of all the money it was bringing in. So it was forgotten in a legal gray area, meaning governments just looked the other way. But Malta saw things differently and became the first to offer legal EU-recognized licenses for internet betting.
So how did this all work? Basically, business people would come to Malta, set up their gambling company for a few thousand euros, and in return receive a license that gave them access to operate anywhere across the European Union, no questions asked. When these countries started restricting internet sites in the early 2000s, they couldn't touch Maltese companies. This was made possible by an oversight in the treaties of the European Union, which basically said that if one country offers a service, that service would be allowed in all of the EU, regardless of their individual restrictions. It was a loophole that business people exploited, giving them access to all of the European Union and the 450 million people that live there. And suddenly, billions of dollars started to flow into the tiny island of Malta.
This wasn't about flashy casinos you would see in Vegas or Macau, but instead the regulatory framework running online casinos across Europe. Soft2Bet is the poster child for a legitimate and respectable Maltese gambling company. In 2023, it reported 67 million euros in profit, 57 million of which went straight into the founder's pocket, Yuri Puljevic. His company operates 8 online casino brands across 12 countries and is headquartered in Malta. But an investigation in early 2025 revealed a much larger, hidden network of blacklisted betting sites. Investigate Europe alleged that Soft2Bet controls a much larger network of 140 gambling sites across Europe, 114 of which are blacklisted in their respective countries. One of the most notorious is Wazamba, a site illegally operating in Germany through a maze of offshore companies. When it inevitably got taken down and dealt with the following lawsuits, the companies that managed it simply moved its money elsewhere. It seems relatively harmless. There's dozens of unlicensed sites operating in Germany at any given time, and players are always paid out their winnings. But legally, Germany owed all of the losses to players who played on the site. Some individuals racking up balances in the hundreds of thousands, all because technically the government allowed for an unlicensed site to exist. Meanwhile, Soft2Bet affiliated offshore companies had already made the cash and any legal liability disappear somewhere in the Caribbean, leaving the tab with Germany. Methods like this exploited the lack of strict regulation in the industry, but the rest of Europe was catching on and ruled that gambling didn't fit the shared services framework it once had. The loophole that made all of this possible was finally being closed, but it still didn't change how easy it was to get a gambling license in Malta. Even if the rest of Europe could now ban these sites quicker, they were disposable. A new one would just pop up the next day and fly under the radar for another 6 months until it was flagged again. Soft2Bet's scheme ran through a maze of offshore shell companies to obfuscate the true legality of them, but they all trace back to Malta, which made the whole thing possible.
So everyone throws around the term shell company when talking about shady business, but what exactly is it? Well, they're companies that appear legit on the surface. They have names, addresses, and all the legal paperwork required to set up a company. but there's no real business that goes on inside of them. Their real job is to hold and hide things, most importantly, liability. So what does this have to do with Malta? Well, a Maltese gambling license is basically a golden ticket to operate your services across all of the European Union. And a shell company holding a license is an umbrella covering dozens of casino brands across the region. The key to this whole scheme was that the shell companies only hold the gambling licenses. The people that actually ran the business, like payment processing, running servers, and doing marketing, were third-party vendors. And the reason for this is that when the regulators came to shut down the websites, they couldn't do anything to the shell companies because they were in full compliance with the law. All they were doing was holding the gambling licenses. The people that were liable were the third-party vendors operating the actual business. But these vendors were scattered across various countries and they were hard to shut down. So in the end, these shell companies would be operating dozens of casino brands, and if one got shut down, it didn't really matter. A new one would just pop up the next day.
The result is a player in Paris betting on a site that's run from a server in Estonia, marketed by an affiliate in London, paid out through a processor in Gibraltar, but licensed by a shell company in Malta. By the time the site is banned, no one knows what's going on, and a new brand is already launched. It's even referred to as an iceberg industry. A small percentage of legal license firms are visible above the surface, hiding a much larger base of criminality beneath. Soft2Bet's clean image removed any suspicion as it won industry awards and held meetings with government officials across the EU, while its broader network allegedly siphoned millions through a legal gray zone. On October 16, 2017, anti-corruption activist Daphne Caruana Galizia left her home in northern Malta. When she got in her car and turned the ignition, a bomb was detonated, killing her instantly. It was the 6th car bombing in Malta since the beginning of 2016. The same year, several investigative journalists, Galizia being one of them, leaked over 11 million sensitive documents known as the Panama Papers. The papers contained information on hundreds of thousands of secret offshore companies and financial information about wealthy individuals and public officials. One case was a mysterious Dubai-based company called 17 Black, owned by Maltese casino magnate Jorgen Fenech, the same person who was caught trying to flee Malta on his private yacht a day after Galizia's assassination. Fenech was one of the most powerful men in Malta, owning the Tumas Group, which controlled much of the country's property development, hospitality, and energy. But his secret company, 17 Black, was exposed by Galizia to have funneled bribery payments to government officials. He was also found to have purchased cyanide powder, grenades, and machine guns off the dark web to use when bribery wasn't enough. The EU was tired of the constant violence going on in Malta during this wave of assassinations. It turned from a quiet, harmless island to Europe's problem child. Malta enacted a new gaming act in March 2018 in a desperate attempt to save its reputation, and appointed Heathcliff Farrugia as its head. He promised to strengthen the Malta Gaming Authority and tighten its regulations, putting an end to the violence. But in the same breath, he was disclosing confidential information to Fenech. The 2 casinos Fenech owned failed anti-money laundering tests after not disclosing the source of funds for their top clients. The compliance report that the MGA was about to release was going to be a huge hit to Fenech's business and reputation, so he expressed his disappointment to Farrugia in an email. It's unknown if he was bribed or threatened, but Farrugia replied within the hour, revealing that Fenech's rival, Casino Malta, was about to fail the same tests. And he even promised to delay the release of the compliance report for Fenech's casinos, giving him time to prepare for any fallout. And just 3 years after his appointment, Farrugia was dismissed from his position as head of the MGA after being charged as the alleged conspirator in the murder of Galizia and over his communication with Fenech. 5 years after the assassination, Fenech was released on a €50 million bail, and he still awaits trial. 2 others involved in the bombing were sentenced to 40 years in prison. It was Malta's most prosperous time, but the island devolved into violence and constant fear, as it was now run by criminals, even attracting interest from organized crime much larger, the Italian mafia. From 2008 onward, Malta saw over 20 mafia-style assassinations. Cafe shootings, car bombings, and disappearing businessmen were the workings of the Italian mafia, who used Malta as their cash cow and as a way to hide their illicit money. Benedetto Bacchi was the kingpin, turning over €1 million a month in profit from his 700 betting shops across Italy, and not a single shop was authorized by Italian gambling regulators, but they were authorized in Malta, allowing them to operate throughout the EU. His empire was made possible with his ties to the mafia, which forced betting agencies to market Bacchi's gambling platforms. His primary platform, Phoenix International, became the mafia's personal cash machine, forcing local betting agencies to push his sites and funneling more than €500,000 a year straight into mob coffers. The rest of the profits were laundered through a maze of Maltese shell companies and real estate deals across Europe. Malta's gambling industry had become the perfect front, a legal disguise for criminal money. In 2018, Italy's anti-mafia investigators launched Operation Game Over, uncovering a continent-wide network of mafia-linked betting sites anchored in Malta's licensing regime. They found that the same Maltese corporate service providers who issued licenses were also creating dummy companies and offshore accounts for mob figures. The investigation ended in Bacchi's arrest, and he was sentenced to 18 years in prison. But he was just one criminal among a dozen others unearthed in Operation Game Over 2. As the name suggests, it was a crackdown of the same scheme, but with even higher stakes. Police shut down the expanded network of the Sicilian mafia, turning over €14 million a month through brands Colmarbet and Italbet365, neither of which were holding Italian or even Maltese licenses, but piggybacked on the complex network of mafia-tied brands that still trace back to Malta. Maltese online gambling was the Italian mafia's source of easy money, and there are countless cases of similar crackdowns. By 2018, Italian authorities had shut down nearly 8,000 illegal betting sites, most of which led back to Maltese shell companies. The once quiet and peaceful island went through a transformation of unimaginable wealth, but could not handle the growth and turned into a haven for organized crime. The legitimate, respectable operators distanced themselves from the island, describing the rampant crime as a hands-off regulatory approach. The EU had enough of Malta's approach to gambling and paying its debts, so several countries filed a wave of lawsuits targeting Malta-licensed gaming companies. Malta's response was Bill 55, an amendment to its gambling regulations that gave Maltese courts the power to block foreign judgments against gambling companies licensed on the island. All of the illegal Maltese sites entering restricted countries like Italy, Germany, and Austria were their problem like always, but now it was secured by Malta's courts. In a sense, Malta won, and to this day still acts as a haven for gambling operators, greatly benefiting its economy. But it has to deal with the consequences like isolating itself from the EU and the reputation stain it got from allowing crime to run rampant.